My hair.
Well, we're live, Anna. We're live.
No.
I had a question. You get, okay, for anybody who's out there and you come in upon this, say, hey, but with StreamYard, you get 10 minutes after your broadcast is scheduled to start with Facebook before they're like, we're going to kick you off. Bye. Oh my gosh. Your hair looks great, Anna.
No, because this camera's backwards.
Everyone's fine.
I'm looking at myself at the camera and I'm doing this. I'm like, wait, it's the opposite. Oh my God.
All right, you guys. So say hey as you guys let us know how you are doing, where you guys are coming from. Oh, Terry says, hey, she just got here.
Hello.
Hey, Terry.
Without electricity at the moment, but so she is tuning in from the dark. Wow. But I'm so happy she's here. So as you guys come in, say hey, let us know how you're doing. I'm really excited to host another one of these panels. I'm really excited for the panels coming up in general. And I actually get to be on somebody else's panel. So that's really exciting. And I'm just really excited to facilitate a space for active and engaged conversation. I think that one of my struggles, and I talked about this a little bit today, Anna, you said you saw the post where I was just a little frustrated with what I felt like we weren't having conversations. We're all kind of like screaming at each other when really a lot of us need to be taking a step back, listening and asking ourselves how we can show up to create a solution. So I think what's beautiful about hosting this space and having these panels is that we provide a space to facilitate conversations and hopefully start creating some solutions, even if that solution is something like we're going to talk about tonight, which is just listening and allowing somebody else to have the microphone and the ability to have the platform and use their voice. So sometimes that's the simplest solution there, is just letting somebody else speak, not having to be the one that has to speak. So as you guys come in, say, hey, I'm like making sure, look at this.
Vanessa!
I love Vanessa.
Oh, this is so, isn't it lovely how everybody knows each other too? Like that makes me so happy. That's the other part. It's like when we do these things, we create bridges and connections. And I think for us to start moving forward, we really have to start recognizing our ability to build bridges instead of burn bridges down. Yeah. So, all right, without further ado, because we started a little late, it's all good. Anna with her lovely hair. I do that all the time, by the way. Anna, I'm like, God, that hair. And I'm like, why am I touching the side of my face when it's like, it's okay. It's okay. All right, I'm going to drop into my intro and we're going to introduce these ladies and we're going to get started on this amazing episode, which for anybody coming in, we are talking about domestic violence. This is the second of 3 panels discussing this topic. And especially in this day and age when we are talking about oppression in general, I think it's very important to start ripping the Band-Aid off and really diving into the wound, because this is such a deep wound. There is no one size fits all healing modality to this. So I think, again, when we take a step back and choose to show up in a space to just hear other people's experiences and how did they move forward, I think that allows us to start building those bridges towards transformation and allowing all of us to show up in a space to help support that and facilitate that. So again, as you guys come in and say, hey, let us know how you're doing. If you feel called to do so, you feel like you receive value and you love these shows, please share these episodes out so I can continue bringing more amazing people. Without further ado, hello and welcome to the TUF Woman Roundtable, everybody. I'm going to back up just a moment. This is the table where I invite some amazing people to pull a seat up to the table and join together in creating epic conversation. Fuck yeah. Yeah. At TUF Woman, I believe that all people have the power within themselves to live life authentically, free from fear, confident in who they are, and empowered to go out and create a life that sets their soul on fire. I also believe, especially right now, that by one person showing up in their power, we give other people permission to step into their own power, thus giving us the opportunity to rise together. Amen to that. Whoop, whoop.
Yes, amen to that. No doubt.
It is through this joined rising that we move ourselves and humanity forward to a more beautiful way of living and being. So you guys, pull up a seat, tune in and join us as we create epic conversations that move and remind everyone of how truly powerful they all are within. Woohoo! Woohoo! Oh my gosh, that's
right.
So
beautiful.
It makes me happy. And it's proof that the more you say something, Like I wrote that on a whim and I would say it and I'd be like, I don't know how I feel about this. And I was the same way with my first intro. And after a while, I was like, you know what? If I get really excited about this, then it's going to be really exciting. And so I've learned to just get real freaking excited about saying it. But what I want to do first and foremost is I want to let you guys introduce yourselves. Let everybody know a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your background story, because I think it's really important, especially when you're talking about something like domestic violence, you know, for people to understand. It's like, what part of this, you know, what part of the discussion are you coming in from, right? What part are you coming in from? How am I able to relate to you? Because especially in something like this, I think it's easier to understand and easier to relate to people when you know the experiences that they've been through that have shaped them. So I'm going to let Anna kick this off. If you want to tell us a little bit about you and just a little bit about your background story, whatever you feel comfortable with, and how domestic violence has, you know, played a part in your life and why it's so important to you to come on and discuss it.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Ashley. I was in a relationship, met somebody many, many years ago, was in a relationship, a long-term relationship, and it was emotional abuse, which happened very, very gradually and insidiously, which is how most abuse happens. And so I didn't know what was happening to me. And I got stuck in a relationship, and without going into detail as to why I was stuck at this point, I was stuck in the relationship and I experienced just a horrific experience of feeling super oppressed, just over time. I won't go into all the detail now, but it was very, very just debilitating, psychologically and emotionally, spiritually, physically. And it is the thing, I would say it's so far in my life experience, and I'm 52 at this point, it has been the event that has had the most impact, I think, on my life. There's a lot of horrible things about it. There's also the flip side is there's a lot of lessons. There's a lot of wisdom and insight that I've gained from it. And the reason why I'm talking about it tonight, and the reason why I want to talk about it for the rest of my life, is that it is something that's so common, and it lurks. You know, there's a lot of sexism and male privilege that feeds into it. I've done a lot of reading on this, in addition to, you know, experiencing it myself, and all the literature just validated exactly what I went through. So there is a lot of male privilege and sexism that goes into this, and I realize and acknowledge that there are also, you know, victims of domestic violence who are male. It's just that the vast majority are female. So that's kind of what I'm speaking to tonight, and that's obviously my experience. It's a very, very common thing, and a lot of it, I think, has to do with the patriarchal system that we live under. I think about 3/4 of women are either currently or have been in domestic violence. And that's something that a woman that on your panel, Kelly Middleman Hager, her research interviewing thousands of women, she said it's actually 79%. So it's super common. So it affects 3 out of 4 women. And so it's important to talk about for that reason. And it's also important to talk about because it is widely misunderstood. And that's what I realized through my experience, how incredibly misunderstood it is. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I'm excited to talk about it. Hopefully I can help other women avoid going through this. Or if they're in it, help them recognize that they're in it, cope with it, you know, maybe a few strategies to cope with the situation, and then envision getting out of the situation, which I realize it's not always possible, and I understand that and respect that. But if at all possible, you know, how can you exit a relationship like that? And then how can you recover from it? Because the recovery process is extremely important. And that's something that's also not understood. So I want to speak to that a little bit tonight too. So thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
was like, awesome. I'm excited too. And I realized that I was meeting my mic. Oh my gosh. All right. So my next guest is Melissa Gale. Melissa, if you want to tell them, your story, a little bit about your story as well, and why it is important for you to be here on this panel discussing this topic.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. I come from a little bit of a different position. And ultimately, what I want to do is help empower women to own their power. And I come from domestic abuse, but I come from a background of sexual abuse before then. And I really think that domestic abuse is really a byproduct of unresolved trauma. And we put our, in an objective way, not in a shame way, because we're all doing the very best that we can. I do a talk, and my talk is how I accidentally married my third husband. And in all of those situations, while they were very different situations, there was one situation that was always the same. They always put me back into a position that matched my own belief systems, that I was unworthy and that I'm unlovable. And until I was willing to go and heal that within myself, it didn't matter. You can get out of the relationship. Great. Good job. You're going to get right back into another one. And so my job, while it is, what I do want to do is empower people, first things first, right? Safety. But the problem is not the abuser. The problem is within our own selves. And that is the good news, right? If it was them, we're just a victim. But when we own our part and we heal that, the possibilities are limitless. And so I'm here to help break the chains off of women who struggle with putting limitations from their own belief systems and then go get themselves in relationships that are so toxic, but also revalidate that faulty belief system that got them there to begin with. And so I'm really excited to be here.
That's awesome. And I think these are going to be really wonderful talking points. And just to give you guys a little bit of background on myself, because I've fully gotten very conscious about the fact that I don't talk about myself enough on my own show. I'll be like, I just assume everybody knows who I am after almost 100 episodes. I'm like, oh, y'all know. But for all the new people, you got to kind of tell people a little bit about who you are. So, you guys, Terry says, yes, break those chains. I love that. I'm always attracted to the word unshackling. Like when I first got into coaching, I was like, I want to help people tackle themselves. So I think that's a really powerful image to keep in there, is like unshackling and breaking your own chains, right? So you guys, my story is very long, so I'm gonna give you guys the what's the notes that you read?
Cliff notes.
Yeah,
Cliff notes.
I'm gonna give you the Cliff Notes.
Cliff notes
of my life. So I started dating when I was 14, and growing up my whole life, my parents were divorced and my dad remarried. And so I had one version of how things went on one side. And then my mom never remarried, but had lots of relationships. And a lot of her relationships that she landed into stemmed from trauma from her childhood, but also unhealed things that in turn passed on to me. So my way of seeing love was vastly different on two scopes, right? I had trauma from never seeing my dad growing up because he worked all the time. So I had a lot of abandonment issues, and I looked for a void to be filled. And on the other side, my version of voids being filled was a relationship. It didn't matter how the relationship looked. And because the way the relationships ended, it was always something wrong. Like, I think my mom always felt that it's something she did. So that was always the message I heard. It's never what they've done. It's always like, what have I done to make them leave, right? It's even like I remember, my mom always talking about like my grandparents, and I don't think this is intentional. This is just to give you a view of how unconscious we can be about the things that we think and say. So it was always like when a relationship would end badly for my mom, it wasn't about the fact that maybe he was just an asshole, or like maybe he was an alcoholic or whatever. It was always like, well, what did she do to end the relationship? It was always, what did she do to make him leave, right? And so that's what I saw. And so I started dating when I was 14. I was very reckless. I had a lot of issues. I had a lot of trust issues, a lot of abandonment issues. And I think it's neat that I think it's going to be great that we talk about the childhood trauma that can be a precursor into the domestic violence, because everything that I grew up sawing was directly reflected in all the relationships that I ended up going into before I recognized my own need for healing. So needless to say, I did like 14
Mhm.
of very bad relationships. I had 2 children out of those relationships, which I like to say, my kids are the greatest gift I've ever received out of some of the greatest curses in my life. So I got 2 wonderful kids. I got a lot of life experience, but at 25, on the cusp of a divorce out of my first marriage that did not even last the full year. Like, the only reason we were married 2 years was because of the legal separation period in North Carolina of a year. You have to be legally separated to pursue a divorce after a year. And I said to myself, I looked down, I had like one of those coming to Jesus moments after, I don't know where she went. I had a coming to Jesus moment after a night of drinking with an ex-boyfriend that I did not need to be with, who was a raging alcoholic. And I said, all right, Ashley, what are you like? What the fuck are you doing with your life? Stop. And there she is. And so, yeah, but I'll tell you guys, just to give you my relationships ranged from sexual abuse, always mental abuse, lots of verbal abuse, a lot of abuse of power. And actually, this is something that is not talked about. So withholding, whether that's sexual withholding affection, anything where affection and love is used as a power play. That was a big dynamic in my relationships. Well, I'll love you if you do this. Well, I'll love you more if you don't do this. I'm going to withhold my love, and I'm going to make you feel like you have to earn it. That was huge in me. So for me, understanding those dynamics and beginning to understand where they played out in my life, like where did I pick those up, allowed me to really start moving forward. And like you guys say, talking about the recovery, which I'm almost 7 years into my own recovery journey, and I'm still undoing things. I was telling, before we go any further, I was telling them about how I work with an energy healer. I just cut the umbilical cord between me and my ex-husband in a metaphorical, energetic sense. I just cut this umbilical cord after 2 years or 7 years, where he was just reaching on to me. So you guys, for anybody who's out there and you're like, well, I've been doing this for 2 years, I feel like I'm not making any headway. Listen, there's no timeline to how
Right.
your recovery is supposed to look. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really passionate about this, and even more passionate now because of hosting this space, because there's a lot of things that we don't talk about. When the marriage ended, I kept, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? Despite the fact that it was my ex-husband who was doing all the things, I kept at, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? So I think we have to learn to switch the narrative. And I'm not saying we need to cast blame on people, but I think it starts by, like you said, Melissa, asking ourselves, what is going on inside of me? That was the biggest question. What is going on inside of me that's creating this? Because ultimately, while we can't always control the things that come into our program, we are actively choosing, whether consciously or subconsciously, to be a participant in the program that we're in this moment. So that if we don't like the program, I always say we have to ask ourselves, what about the program is that we don't like, and how can we change the narrative of the program that we're in, or create a new program all in general. So that's my like context there. That's my context. All right, you guys. So before we go, because I want to make sure we get ample time to discuss the 2 topics that we're really talking about. So first, I really want to talk about acknowledging the precursor to domestic violence. What does it look like that potentially leads women, especially, to getting ourselves into situations that lead to domestic violence, whether that's and I want to touch base on it. If you guys can add on to this, that there are many layers and faces to domestic violence. I think the reason it's so taboo is because when we think of domestic violence, the first thing you see is a woman battered and bruised, and he's obviously just beat the hell out of her. And that's not always the case. Like I said, a big thing for me was withholding. Withholding is a form, is a power play. And it's a form, I would say, like power abuse. I don't know. I'm sure there's a correct term for it. But that's anything like withholding sex, and that can be done male or female. I've seen women who withhold having sex as a way to hold control. Withholding children, that's a huge one. Withholding custody of children, because that we know that's going to hurt the other person. So
That's psychological abuse.
Yeah, psychological. There we go. That's, I'm like, I know it's so. I want to talk about the precursor to domestic violence, and you can talk about this in a way of like your own childhood. Not everybody necessarily goes through that blatant trauma, but I want to talk about the fact that we all go through trauma. So I want to ask you ladies, what was it like acknowledging the inner deep subconscious work you had to do? Because what did you have to acknowledge in your own life and in your own patterns and thinking that potentially could have led you or continue leading you into these situations of domestic violence? And before I have you guys answer this, I think it's really imperative that we clarify. This is in no way of us trying to victim shame. I want to clarify that really, really quickly. Because you know what, sometimes good people just end up in these situations. But I think the reason that we're talking about this is because it's really imperative to understand that if you have an underlying abandonment issue, that could lead you to dating out of desperation and putting you into a situation where you completely ignore red flags, and then you're going, oh my God, how did I get here? So I want to ask you ladies, in acknowledging the inner deep subconscious work you need to do, what is it that came up for you when you started, going down that road of recovery and like acknowledging that you had just come out of a domestic violence situation? And I'm going to start with Melissa first, and then we'll go to Anna.
It's a great question. So as I told you before, my background was sexual abuse. I was sexually abused from 2 to 25. And I always say it wasn't the abuse that ruined my life. It was these beliefs that I made up about myself, and then the relationships that I carried that ruined my life. And you're absolutely right about the psychological abuse and the different things like that. Quite frankly, I'd rather be raped again sometimes than go through the years of abuse. When you get raped, you're done, right? It sounds callous and it sounds horrible, but that's how painful domestic abuse can be. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to shed any light on this, and I also don't want to shame. So in the beginning, it did look like shame. It did look like shame whenever I started to notice my own patterns. And then I used that to guilt myself, because that's a pattern that I have, is to guilt myself. And what I really had to do was start looking at these patterns. And the way that I like to say how things show up, I like to just I'll give you an example of how early childhood trauma, hi Samantha, early childhood trauma created belief systems that then created behaviors that led me to domestic abuse. So here it is. So whenever I was younger, I had a lot of trauma in my body, which creates cortisol in the brain. Okay. So I grew up and learned how to make decisions with cortisol. I also know some of my core needs, and one of my core needs is variety. It's how God made me. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But when you put this combination together, it can lead to something really not so well. You add the belief system that I had that I'm unlovable on top of it, the fact that I had to perform perfectly and amazingly with sex, and then someone's going to love me, that will, like you said, I don't know if you call it desperation or what it is. It creates codependency. I need something from you because I've given you my power, because I need your validation. I need you to prove to me that I'm worthy. And maybe if I can have sex good enough, or if I can cook good enough, or I can be a good enough mom, or if I can be all of these different things that I was programmed to think, then I would have that. Okay. So when you add all of those three things together, it creates a problem. Now you add the fact that I don't know how to really make decisions without cortisol, and I'll save the whole conversation of addiction and how that works in. We see addicts do this all the time. Everything's going good, great. Again, from childhood trauma, because addicts have the domestic abuse. It's all byproducts of this. And it doesn't have to be major trauma, like you said. It's basically these influences, events, and people that, and it can be environmental programming, but it's these programs that we have that lead us to down the road. So I have this deep need for variety in my life, and I sought it through chaos, because with the chaos, I got all of the cortisol, and cortisol helps me make decisions. So whenever I started having to create this responsibility to heal myself, I had to get really brave with myself, be really brave and really look at and own what I was bringing into this relationship while I was doing it. And I had to look at the abandonment that I had. I had to look at the fact that I felt like I was unlovable, right? And so the way that I saw it, that chaos was through relationships, bad ones. And it was a double duo. I got all the cortisol. You never know what you're going to get when you're with a domestic abuse partner. All kinds of variety there. So it's meeting my core needs, because our unconscious mind always meets our needs. And it's going to take the easiest, fastest path. The problem is it's going to do it based on those belief systems that we made, most of them by the time we were 8 years old, right? And I was already raped at that point. So I was already trying to get love. And so I would get into these relationships. So it was twofold. One, it met my need for a variety. It met my need for the cortisol. And in addition to that, it continued to prove this worth that I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy of a real relationship. And until, not to challenge anything of what y'all are saying, but I believe that it can be faster. When you do the work on the unconscious level, just like what you did, Ashley, when you cut the cord with the umbilical cord and you did this energy work, when you can find someone who can help you work at a subconscious level and you can get to those root belief systems, you absolutely can change. I spent 20 years on a counselor's couch. I was not healed, not from not trying. I spent at least $100,000 trying to get healed. Nobody had the answers because this work wasn't being talked about.
Right.
And there are so many people out there struggling right now that need this help. And that's why I'm so honored to even be on this.
Oh.
She's coming back in a minute.
Oh my God. Okay.
Her computer just couldn't handle all the information that she was transmitting.
She was just, wait. I'm going to take her. Okay.
Oh, wait, she's coming back. She's coming back.
Yeah, she couldn't handle what she was putting down. Oh. It's all
so
good.
I am out here in the mountains. So, and that's one of the things, and it's a prime example. This is a price that I pay. I do pay because I don't have the best internet connection all the time, but I get to meet my own needs every day. I meet that variety. I've traveled 75,000 miles, camped all over the United States, all over Canada for the past 18 months because I need that variety and I meet it in a healthy way. I don't have to meet it by having these relationships, but until we are brave enough to face ourselves so that we know what our needs are, we can't get anywhere.
Amen.
We can't get anywhere. So
yeah,
and it's examining those small things and those shifts and what those belief systems are.
I 100% agree with that. I always recommend, especially for women, taking a period of self-solitude, especially when you come out of a very traumatic relationship. Like, take some time, man. Like, really, because we're just so quick to be like, I don't want to handle this. I don't want to deal with this pain. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get under, what's it like? Get under somebody else to get over somebody? Like, no, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
No, it does not.
So, Anna, I want to
Turns out.
It doesn't work. So Anna, I want to ask you the same question. What was it? What was the journey of acknowledging your own inner belief system, and how did that look as far as like being mirrored back to you in the relationships you were in? Like, can you see those pieces that could have led you to being with that person? Because I remember when you came on the show, and you had those discussions. You're like, I never would have imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I will go into that. You're right. I did say that I would never have imagined that I would have ended up in one of these relationships, because the media portrays domestic violence, at least what I, have seen in my lifetime, is honestly, the way they portray domestic violence is, like you said, the woman is all beat up, and this sounds mean, but like she just looks, they portray her like this loser. Just, she's just
unempowered.
dumb. She's just dumb and what?
Unempowered.
Totally, yeah, totally unempowered, and just like if somebody were just to walk up to her and go, "Hey, listen, I want to treat you really brutally," and then she goes, "Oh yes, I want that." I mean, that's like how they're portrayed in the media, and so you think that so you think that, oh, that would never happen to me, and the number of women I'm going to answer the question in a minute, but the number of women that I have met who are incredibly smart, dynamic, come from educated families, whatever, have great personalities. And actually, that's another point. I think narcissists are attracted to a certain type of personality that's very spiritual, that's very maternal, that has certain energy, because that's what they're looking for. Is they're looking for a certain type of energy that they can extract because they don't have it themselves, and that's from their childhood wounds. But anyway, so getting back to answering your question about how I, what happened to me in my past as to why I would be prone to this. And what I believe is that, yes, I do believe that in many, many cases, it's childhood trauma. In my case, I was bullied in my childhood. There were a couple of people that were, the school that I went to, there was one person that worked at the school, and then there was another person in my neighborhood, and it was all emotional abuse, and I didn't even realize it, obviously, at the time. But looking back, I can see, I spent a lot of time with them, and they had a huge impact on me, on the time I spent. And there was so much emotional abuse, which then, what am I trying to say? Like Melissa said, there were certain patterns certain beliefs that were installed, and then those affected my behaviors. Mm-hmm. And there's these certain behavioral patterns that sort of get installed. And so one of the things that I acquired, and I actually remember this from my childhood, I was right around 12 years old, because I remember one of my sisters commenting on it to me. She goes, "Oh, Anna, quit trying to be Miss Easygoing Susie," because what happened was I took on the belief that if I could just be super easygoing and be the nice one, and whatever people wanted, I would just accommodate so that there would be harmony. I just realized this recently.
Take your voice away.
It takes your voice away. It takes your power away. You give up your power, and you don't even realize you're giving it up. And so you become what they call a people pleaser. So I became a people pleaser, and that became, deeply embedded in my thought system and in my behavior. And so anytime there was a conflict anywhere, whether it was, with a friend, with a family member or anything, I would just sort of kind of say what they wanted to hear, and I wouldn't. Over time, actually, what happened is like Melissa said, what did you say, Melissa? I gave up. You quiet your voice. Is that what you said?
Yeah, you quiet.
I say you give up your voice. Yeah,
you give up your voice. That is exactly what happened, and it happened to varying degrees, starting in childhood, and then into adulthood. And then what happened was, because I had that kind of people pleasing and not speaking up, and even though my true personality is extremely outspoken, I mean, I am like a very, very, I have very strong ideals. I'm very, I can be really like bullheaded, and like as a very young child, I was just like very strong personality, very outspoken. But I shut that down and really what we do is we shut down certain parts of ourselves in order to survive. I mean, that's what we do. We think we're going to survive.
Exactly.
And in a sense,
nail on the head.
Because we have to, in order to avoid conflict, because the conflict is because the emotional abuse is so traumatic, because every time you speak up, because that is one of the hallmarks of emotional abuse, is your voice, the abuser does not want to hear your opinion. And so when you voice your opinion, whether it's you disagree, if you go along with your abuser, everything's fine. But if you don't, then there's hell to pay, because they're going to get super angry. They're going to, it just, and eventually over time, what happens is it costs you so much energy that subconsciously you make the decision to stop speaking up, because it just takes too much energy. And it's that cortisol that Melissa mentioned. Your cortisol spikes every time, because your cortisol is the hormone that creates the buffer between you and stress, and it allows you to confront, and we all go through this to varying degrees. People who haven't been in domestic violence, your cortisol spikes in order to just meet the daily demands of life. But when you're dealing with extreme demands, in other words, emotional and psychological abuse, where you have somebody criticizing you, blaming you for everything, you just, nothing you do is good enough, nothing you do is right. It demands a lot of cortisol, and so you're constantly, if you're trying to, butt heads with them, if you decide to butt heads with them, your cortisol spikes even more. And so anyway, in a nutshell, it costs way too much energy to do that. And so that's one of the things that people don't understand. They're like, why do you put up with that? And it's like, it's a survival mechanism. Even though you know that it sucks, it's a survival mechanism. So that's sort of the conditioning that I had from childhood. And so, I arrive in adulthood, and here I am, this people-pleasing person who also, not only was I a people-pleaser, but, and of course, didn't realize it at the time. And all of this is obviously in hindsight, the lessons that I've gained from all of this is that I didn't value myself. And that, that is really at the core of domestic violence. I can't speak to other forms of abuse. I don't have experience with sexual abuse or other, but I do have experience with emotional and psychological abuse. I have a lot. And so, hold on, I just lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Just a lack of
You're talking about value, your value with the value. Yeah.
Right. So self-worth, lack of self-worth is at the core of this. And you don't value yourself enough, and you haven't learned healthy boundaries, which healthy boundaries are like, okay, you just said something really shitty to me. That's not okay. Or you just, did something inconsiderate. That's not okay. Those are boundaries. Boundaries are other things like you're invited out with friends to do something and you really don't feel like it. And you say, no, I don't feel like it. I mean, that sounds so basic and so many to people who are really good at that. But to somebody like me and others like me, where you've been conditioned to just, and actually there's a lot of people that do this, and there's a lot of women that do this. And I think a lot of women who haven't even been in domestic violence, domestically violent relationships, because we're conditioned as women to do this, to please others, to go along and not to speak our truth. So anyway, I didn't have the boundaries. And so because I didn't have the boundaries, I didn't have the boundaries, I was the people pleaser. I didn't trust myself. That is another huge thing. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my own perception of reality because of the conditioning from, those two people that I mentioned in my childhood who had a big effect on me. And so at the beginning of this relationship, my gut was telling me no. Over and over and over, my gut was like, no, Anna, get out. And I'm just going to say the abuser. I mean, I don't know what else to the narcissist. I'll say the narcissist because that's what they are. So this narcissist used manipulation, different forms of manipulation and charm because those are some of the tactics they use to reel me in. And so one example of not trusting myself and and that contributed to me getting trapped in this relationship. Was very early on. I remember I said to him, I'll never forget this. We were standing outside in the area where I lived in my neighborhood. I think we had gone for a walk and we were still, somewhere in the neighborhood walking. And we stopped under this tree. And it was really hard for me to tell him this because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But I was about to tell him, and I did tell him. I said, I love you as a brother, like a brother, but I just don't have enough love for you to have a serious relationship, a romantic relationship with you. And he looked at me. I'll never forget this. And he goes, Anna, you do love me. I can see it in your eyes. And he's looking right at me and he's like, you do love me. I can see it in your eyes. And it was almost like hypnosis. Now, to somebody who has a very strong sense of self, okay, somebody who's a very, very, very strong sense of self is going to be like, no, that's bullshit. I don't love you.
Mind tricks won't work.
And goodbye. But to somebody like me that had all the things I mentioned and didn't trust myself. And there's one other point, because there's always a power imbalance and there's always certain things that make you vulnerable. There was another thing, and it was that at that point, I wanted to get into a serious relationship because I wanted to eventually have, this was a long, long time ago, but I wanted to eventually have kids. And there was nobody else on the horizon, and this guy was so into me. And so it's kind of like in sales, it's like he had something that I wanted and the offer seemed really good in a lot of ways. And so I just kind of settled into that relationship. So those are the things that made me vulnerable to start with. And so that is how I fell into that relationship. It's all those patterns and behavior and beliefs that were in place that made me vulnerable.
Oh, and I think that's really, like, I think that I love that you guys brought that up too. Like that's very key to understanding our own thought processes and how we view ourselves, because a lot of mine came from just, I always felt that my validation always came from if a man wanted to have sex with me. My deep-seated belief was that if a man did not want to sleep with me and relatively quickly, that meant that I was unworthy of being loved and I was unattractive and I was just not a worthy person in general. And when I came to that recognition of that pattern within my life, that was extremely freeing. And it actually took away this need to assert myself sexually, because I was actually when I looked back on it, I was actually quite aggressive sexually. Like I was hypersexual. And I was like, why am I like this? Like, I tended to actually be a little mean if a man rejected me, and not even just rejecting me because he didn't want to be with me, but because he wanted to create and establish that boundary. Like, hey, listen, we don't have to sleep together. And I'd be like, oh, no. Like, it was almost like a reverse sense of abuse. Like, and I'm not saying it's totally, but that was how that worked for me. So knowing that allowed me to really dive into it's like, well, why do I feel like I need to? And that even trickled into a larger theme that's been a really large theme in my life, which was pouring so much into people, and the belief that what I pour into them is going to somehow be poured back into me, and I'm going to receive that love that I'm so freely pushing into them, versus fueling myself first, going, okay, let me love myself first. And the love that I give to them is actually an overflow from myself, meaning I filled myself up first, and now I can give them love. But I was actually disconnecting from filling myself up and filling them up in the hopes that they would pour that back into me. And that was a very vicious cycle. And it continually, like, that, I was amazed that was actually showing up in my business. Like, it was such a deep-seated thing that it was showing up in how I interacted with potential clients and everything else. So you guys, I think it's for the audience out there, not from even just a standpoint of domestic violence, but looking at just your life as a whole and the patterns within your life. This is really key for anything that you're doing. And why I think talking about it is so important, because it's not talked about. I know we're all like love and light and everything else. And it's like, no, if you don't understand what is going on in the darkness, that's the part that comes out in your life. So because we're a little bit short on time, I wanted to make sure that we talked about this, because I know, Anna, this was important with you. And I feel like this is important to you too, Melissa, because you're so big on, in acknowledging what's going on. So I want to talk about active recovery and how we can become the active, I'm not sure that the participant, but the active creators of our recovery, if you're coming out of a situation, because, obviously there's the exit strategy and stuff, but it's like, what happens when we get out of the situation? Like you said, Melissa, you might leave the situation, then 2 weeks later, you're back in it, or you have a friend who like keeps leaving, going back. It's like, so once we've exited, how do we become proactive participants in our recovery? And Anna, I want to start off with you. I know we just ended with you. I want to start off with you because I know that this was something you were passionate about. And Melissa, I want to end with you because I think you're going to have some really good nuggets for this as well. So if you ladies are okay with that, that's good. Yep. Okay. So Anna, if you want,
well, however you want to do it.
No, I think that's great, because I think Melissa's part of the recovery is actually the piece that happens after what I'm going to talk about. So I think it's good that we end with Melissa. One of the things, so talking about recovery, first I want to mention the moment, this is very interesting, the moment I decided to end that relationship, instantaneously, I downloaded like 7 lessons, which I wrote down 5 of them here. I have the rest of them written down. I can't remember the others, but I mean, they were there, but I probably had been ignoring them the whole time. And as soon as it was amazing. It was amazing. It's like the instant I made the decision to leave, they came to my mind. And the first one was self-worth. Know your value. You are valuable. Then it was trust your gut, trust yourself. Then it was trust God, trust the universe, trust source, whatever you want to call it. Basically, trust in a higher power to ultimately take care of you. And then it was take care of yourself first and then take care of others. And then the other one was speak your truth. So I realized all of that as soon as I decided to leave. And my recovery has been, I believe that recovery it can take a short or a long time depending on the person. I think every person's experience is unique. And although this happened a very long time ago, and I left that experience a very long time ago, there are still pieces of that I'm working on. And I'm actually consciously staying in a certain part of this recovery because I'm mining the data and mining the insights from it. So I could go straight to, I've been in this recovery period for a very long time. Like I said, I could go to the higher spiritual aspects of it, which sounds like what Melissa's going to talk about. But I actually am first interested in the more kind of concrete earth plane aspects of it, if you want to call it that. And because I really want to help women, other women that are in this situation. So one of the things I want to mention that's super important is there is this idea in popular psychology, and I totally understand it because I've studied a lot of it. I've studied law of attraction, Abraham Hicks. I've done it for years and years and years. So like, I get it. And I get all the spiritual stuff. And there's and the ultimate lessons and how you ultimately save yourself. And I totally believe that. But first, there is a piece where you, because of what has happened, and this is my take on it, Melissa may or may not agree with me, but there's a piece of this where that you have to acknowledge the negative, because that's what I wanted to say was there's a lot of, in fact, I did a podcast on this, toxic positivity, and I'm doing another one on it to continue. There's this idea that you have to,
Amen.
There's this idea that, think positive. It's just in the past. I worked with a coach actually years ago with a background in psychology. She studied psychology, and stuff would come up about this relationship, and it was pain that was coming up, and things that I needed to understand, because that's the point. That's the beauty of going through stuff like this, is you gain wisdom and insight. But if you can't process it, you're not going to gain that insight. If you just gloss over it, and so I realized that so people would say, oh, just get over it. It's okay. You are your, you saved yourself. These are the spiritual reasons why. And, they may even talk about you chose this as a soul contract, which is possible. That's totally possible. But we are on this earth plane, and I am in this life right now. And I was in this relationship with this person, and I experienced an insane amount of pain, pure hell, and where you're just getting pounded, on a regular basis, and you feel stuck. And there's certain reasons why I was stuck, which I won't go into in this show. But my point is this: when you experience pain, especially emotional pain, which is actually the worst kind of pain, it's worse than physical, and there's studies that show that. You have to grieve that pain. You first have to grieve it. You have to acknowledge it. And so I would do that. And as I was grieving it, first of all, you have to gain a grip on reality, because when you've been in emotional abuse, the person, the narcissist has been gaslighting you the entire time. They've been denying your perception of reality. So you've been saying, stop talking like this to me, stop doing this to me. And they've been saying, I'm not doing anything. What are you talking about? And they insist on it so long and so hard and so convictedly that over time, and because of what's happening with your adrenals and your whole endocrine system and your nervous system, is just over time, you become so weak. And there's a lot of literature on this. You believe them, and you trust them more than you trust yourself. And you trust their perception of reality instead of yourself. And there's a really good quote from the movie Just Mercy that I quoted on my Facebook, talking about that very thing. The guy that was accused of killing somebody that he didn't kill, but over, everybody was saying he was the killer. And so after a few years, he's like, I don't know what to believe. That's what happens in emotional abuse. And so the first piece in recovery, or one of the first pieces, is first regaining a grip on reality. And in order to, so what that looks like is, wait a minute, this really did happen to me. All these things really did happen to me. And first you do that so that you can tell yourself. And what happens with that is it boosts your confidence, because you realize, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. This actually did happen. And so that's number one. And that takes time to because of the psychology of it. And actually the psychology of it is fascinating. So it's like you've been brainwashed almost. You have to kind of brainwash yourself back to, okay, now I'm back in reality and I realize what happened. Then once you realize what actually happened, because most people who go through these relationships, they don't even realize it's happening. I have a friend that just told me she didn't even realize until she was out of the relationship that it actually happened. I have friends who are in marriages right now who I know from what they've described to me is emotional abuse, and they don't even know it. So first you have to gain a grip on reality. Then you grieve what happened, because grieving is human. We are on planet Earth. We are not in the spiritual realm. Okay? So when we're on planet Earth, we have this earthly body and these emotions. And when we've been injured, we grieve. It's totally normal. Because of all the loss. If you lose, anybody who's lost a close family member or a dog or a cat understands the normal human need to grieve. It's a healthy, normal need. So that grieving period can last a while. For me, it lasted 2.5 years. And sometimes it still comes back up and I don't even realize it. So during that time period, you are going to be negative. Yeah, you're going to be negative. You're not going to be like, oh, love and light and everything's great. It's just like if somebody's, somebody, I don't know, this sounds bad, but like somebody's child dies. They do not want to hear anything that dismisses or minimizes their pain, because that's the point I wanted to get to in this show, which you and I discussed before the show, is we are actually biologically wired. We have a biological need for our pain to be recognized, to be heard. We need to be heard and we need to be understood and validated. And so that's why, and I'll just mention this briefly because I know I don't want to take up too much time, but to draw parallels between domestic violence and racism, this whole experience opened my eyes. I mean, it was like I was looking at, I've always been, very sad about racism, but I was seeing racism like this. Now I see it like this. It's so clear to me. Partly why, people of color are so fed up is because, number one, it's the initial trauma of being treated like second-class citizens, just like you are in a relationship with domestic violence. So it's all the poor treatment. And then secondly, it's when they complain about it or talk about it, people don't recognize it and people don't acknowledge it and validate it. And when your pain is not validated, it is incredibly traumatizing. So that's the first step. And then I think we can segue into what Melissa is going to say, is, to talk about her. But, oh, wait, one last point I want to make. And that is that there is a difference between grieving and ruminating, because we have this thing in our culture where, oh, you shouldn't complain. And, I have been to multiple seminars. I have spent a lot of money on going to different seminars. And so I understand all the positive psychology and why that's so important. And there is a place for that. But this is one thing I would like every coach on the planet to understand, that there is a place for that. But when you are helping somebody who has been through extreme trauma, or maybe not even extreme trauma, you've got to acknowledge that pain and allow them to grieve it, and not say, oh, stop complaining. Because somebody who's just complaining and complains all the time and is just a negative Nelly, that's complaining, that's ruminating. But somebody who's been through extreme trauma and they're processing that trauma, that's not ruminating, that's grieving. And that's the difference that I want coaches and people, if you want to be a good coach, if you want to be a good friend or family member, understand the difference between grieving versus ruminating. I should write an article on that because I came up with that. Grieving versus ruminating. All right, I'm done. Melissa, take it away.
Yeah, take it away, Melissa.
All right.
I just got some good stuff here.
Awesome. I really love that you touched on that spiritual bypassing, because so many coaches want to go straight to, and I'm a very spiritual person. I absolutely, so in no way am I dismissing that. In fact, I think it is critical. But I don't know one preacher, when their kid's leg gets broken because they fall off the monkey bars, that right after they call the church to pray, doesn't take their kid to the hospital to get well. And we are the hospital. If you are a coach and you are not a hospital, as far as trauma goes, reevaluate.
Yeah.
Because you're right. That pain does have to be validated. And you're right. The very first thing is to grieve. If we are not willing to feel, we cannot heal. It is only through that we get better. And that takes bravery and courage so that we can create the change. It's the only way. And, as you do that, and really what I would say is, as far to fully answer the question, what you do after that is you go heal the unconscious mind. If you don't have tools to heal the unconscious mind, get with me. and clear your reticular activating system, which is what houses all of your belief systems that you have. And let's be honest, we have a billion-dollar industry banking on us waking up and feeling unworthy and like shit every day. Makeup industry, workout industry, pill industry, cosmetic surgery, it's all there. Like, if I'm just this, then I can be lovable. Yeah. You must clear the reticular activating system. You have to get down to these root things. And until that happens, we will continue to repeat this pattern. And it's not because we're doomed. It's we haven't learned the lesson yet, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But when we take our freaking power back and we say, you know what, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to look at my part, it's not all me. It never was. And that's okay. But if you can start becoming the observer to your life, and you can start taking a little bit of bravery and piece by piece, just like you were saying, healing isn't linear. It's not something that's going to happen instantly. And as soon as you think that you are, it's like a freaking mirage. Oh, another layer comes out, right? And in the beginning, it feels like the layers of an onion. And every time you peel off, your onion gets bigger. And that's okay too. If you stay the course and you continue to be brave and own your own shit, you're going to get better.
Yes, I agree.
You just will. And I encourage everyone, my entire life purpose is to end trauma on a global scale, one family at a time. And it starts with healing ourselves. We are the answer. You are the answer.
And I just want to touch on that before we go, because we're a little over, and that's all right, because we started a little late. And I was telling, for anybody coming, I was talking about this to the ladies on my panel, and I cannot remember where I heard it, but it's when I've learned about collective healing. And it was about meditation. And they said for every person that meditated for 7 minutes, you were actually vibrationally and energetically helping like 72 people to heal or start their own healing journey. So the reason I think it's so important, because when I got into this, I was kind of like real high-headed, and I still am. But I said I wanted to help women shift the paradigm, and I wanted to help women heal the paradigm that we had grown up under, this oppressive paradigm that we as women have embarked upon for millennia, right? We're always told just how we should feel about ourselves. How does it feel? I love it when men try to mansplain how it must feel to be on a period, right? My favorite joke, I stubbed my pinky toe once. Please, no more. Like, stop, right? But I was like, I wanted, the one that bothered me the most was the trauma of sisterhood, and how sisterhood had become so fractured, and how women couldn't work together, and how we were constantly told. And I think that that's another thing. When we become conscious of our own beliefs, we become conscious of the things that have been told to us. Like you said, Anna, like you looked at it and it's like, no, you do love me. Like how many times can you go back to your childhood and think of all the times that people told you, this is no, you're not really sad, right? You're not really sad, right? And so essentially we grow up being gaslighted unintentionally our whole life. And so no wonder we go into these situations where gaslighting seems like a normal thing to us, because guess what? That's what we, especially as women, we come up saying, like you said, if we just look like this, then we're worthy of being loved, right? Because what was the biggest, I remember my dad getting this Sports Illustrated bikini edition, right? And I remember thinking like, man, maybe if I look like that, that'll make me like more attractive. And I remember that spiraling into a horrific like eating disorder when I was very young. So I think that, of course, like you said, it starts with us. And I love that you talk about the grieving part of it, Anna, because I think that that's really important, especially right now, especially with where we're at. We are so attuned. And this is interesting. I saw a woman say that she was renouncing being the title, the light worker, and she was instead going to embrace the title of being a shadow worker, because there's a Rumi quote that says the wound is where the light gets in. And we're so focused on the light, but what we don't talk about is the wound, right? Where does the light get into the wound? But what I wanted to circle back to is when we start actively healing ourselves, that's how we begin healing the collective. Healing the collective is not this monumental movement where you're going to go out there and collect all these people, because here's the deal. If you're walking around unhealed, it's like you'll walk, if
you're creating trauma.
Yeah, if you walk around unhealed, you're going to bleed on people who never cut you, and you're going to continue pervading that trauma, and you're going to continue having relationships that that validate that trauma, that you are worthy of that trauma, that the only thing that
Exactly.
you'll ever bring into your life is
Exactly.
trauma. And so what happens is that when you start healing yourself, like for me, I started breaking generational trauma. I started allowing my daughter to recognize what do boundaries look like.
Yes.
Because I can't teach my daughter what boundaries look like if I myself don't have boundaries, right? You can't. I can't tell her what does it look like to have self-worth if I don't have self-worth. And and hence this great conversation, ladies. So again, back to what you both said. First and foremost, we must acknowledge what we have been through. I think when I went through my divorce, the most frustrating thing that got told to me at the time was that I had to grieve, because you're talking to someone who didn't want to acknowledge emotion, because I feel emotion very intensely.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad going to me, you have to grieve. Divorce is a death. A relationship ending is a death. You have to grieve it the same way you would grieve the death of a child. Maybe it doesn't feel the same, but it's a death, and you need to give it you need to allow it its space. So I had to recognize that that was over, that every hope, and it's not just that the relationship dies, but I had to give up the hopes and dreams I had for what my marriage, what I thought it was going to look like. I had to give up the feeling of worth I attached to being married. Because now look at me, who's going to want to be with someone who's a single mom to 2 kids and who has 2 kids, 2 baby daddies. We're going to put it that way. So I had to release that. So there's a lot of that. So I think it's important that I think what both of you guys state so nicely is just we have to become conscious of our own healing. We have to be an active creator of our own healing. And that by actively healing
Co-creation. Yeah.
we begin co-creating with the rest of the world to create even more healing. And the one thing I want to end on, you guys, and this was like huge for me, and I thought about this, is like, not only do we need to sit in a space, especially with racism and everything else, and take a seat and listen to other people, right? And I just lost my train of thought. Oh my Lord. All right, no. So, but we need to learn to start meeting things head on with love. And I'm not saying that we need to bypass people, but when people are having a reaction to us, because most of the times, 9 times out of 10, people are not listening to respond. They're listening to react to what you're saying, about to say.
Yeah.
If we can take a step back and not automatically say the first thing that necessarily comes out of our mouth, like I'm bad to do, and meet people with love and ask ourselves, what trauma or programming are they reacting from? I think that that's also going to create a tremendous space for things to start moving forward. And I'll say that from the space of recognizing that not to let him off the hook, but recognizing that my ex-husband was dealing with his own undealt with trauma.
Yes.
That led him to doing what he did. So like I said, it wasn't letting him off the hook for his shit behavior, because it's the fact of the matter is understanding that he is going through his own trauma just like everybody else in the world is. So it gave me that space to go, you know what? How do I want to respond and show up in this space? How do I want to be responsible for myself in this space? And that was incredibly freeing in my own recovery, because it meant that I wasn't responsible for how he reacted, because I couldn't control that. But I could be responsible for how I chose to show up in response to the situation. Did I choose to show up and continue feeding into him, knowing that that's what he was seeking? Or could I remove myself from the conversation, go, you know what, this is not beneficial for me. We're not going to go anywhere. I remember even saying that, like, I'm not going to have this hamster wheel conversation with you anymore. I'm not going to do it. We're not going to have the same fight. I'm not going to be an active participant in this. And you know what, you guys, he got pissed. He was mad. But you know what? You know who felt good? I did. I felt fantastic. I was like, oh my God, this is great. So, you guys, I think what these ladies have nicely summed up, and because we do need to get off here, I want to respect everybody's time, is that be conscious of where you're at in your journey. Be conscious of where you're at in your recovery. And first and foremost, actively choose to acknowledge what you have going on. Acknowledge everything and feel it. Like that's the huge thing. Feel it.
Yes.
And I guess one thing I want to put is, don't allow anybody to make you feel like what you're feeling isn't worthy of being felt. Don't allow anybody to make you feel like, before we get off? Go ahead, Anna.
No, I just to add to what you're saying, you actually have to feel the feelings in order to release them.
Mhm.
Because if you try to ignore the feelings, they're going to stay in your body and create health problems. You have to, so when you're in pain, you can't go around the pain. You can't go, skip the pain. You have to go through the pain to be able to exit out on the other side. I mean, some people ignore it. They choose to ignore it, but then they get health problems. And so you got to go through the pain. And believe me, it's way better to do that. It's not that hard. It's really like, I'll just say this really quick. If anybody's ever been through childbirth, it's like when you have contractions. I remember when at the beginning of having the contractions, I was scared. And then I was like, no, just relax, Anna. And then with each contraction, when it came, rather than going and trying to ignore it, I was like, okay, it's coming. And I would just allow it to happen, and then it would pass. And so that's what happens with this emotion, with these waves of emotions, but understand that they will pass. And you have to allow them like water to move through you and then out.
Yeah. Amen. All right, you guys. So this was a really awesome conversation. This went way faster than even I anticipated. I was like, oh my God. So just in case either of you ladies want to come on next week, I know I got a couple more open spots. I think I've only got like one person on there. So, I have faith that you will fill up as needed. But you guys, Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have another amazing woman coming on. And we also have one last domestic violence panel next Tuesday. And then you guys, I'm really even more excited to begin facilitating a space for women of color to come on and start talking about what does it mean to be walking through this journey that we're on right now? What does it mean to be dealing with racism in a real way? Like, what does that look like? And I want to clarify, and I thought this was really important. I have these ladies coming on just to talk, and I didn't want them to come on and feel like that they had to educate Kate, because the biggest thing that came to me is that nobody's responsible for my education except myself. It is up to me, again, to become conscious of the part that I play and the role that I play, and what role do I actually want to play in this world. So I'm really excited to begin facilitating these conversations and just providing a platform for all women of color to come on and just use their voice and share their story. Because like I said, I think it's time for a lot of us to take a step back and allow other people to have the platform, allow other people to have that privilege and that honor to come on and utilize their voice to create solutions. Because you know what? I think the best solutions are when we all come together and go, you know what? I don't know what I don't know. You know something, I know something, and we can come together and create something that's going to help each other out. So I think the more of us can show up in that
Which goes right back to that collective you were talking about.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for being on here. For any of you guys out there that want to connect, connect with them on Facebook. Please reach out. I think we got the tagging thing situated with you, Melissa, but I don't know if either of you ladies would like to come back on. I have open spots because I know that there's so much more. There's so many layers to this. I feel like there could be many panels, and I hope that's the case. And I think just you guys, for anybody out there wondering if your voice matters, let me tell you something. Sometimes these are not that big, but there's always one person that tells me of how much this changed. You just don't know whose life you're going to change. So if you have an inkling to get up there and provide some kind of platform to facilitate change, even if it is just one person you don't know, that one person could be the next MLK, could be the next, Mother Teresa. It could be the next person that is like the catalyst for absolute change in this world. And because you showed up in this space, because you said, you know what, I want to be responsible for my own healing to help the collective. That's how that catalyst is what brought that about. So if anybody's out there wondering if they could ever make a difference, opening your mouth and saying something makes a difference. Lending an ear and saying, I hear you and I see you exactly as you are makes a difference. Like these ladies said, just validating someone for themselves makes a difference. So, all right, you guys, Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So excited. We'll be back again. Thank you guys so much for this.
Thank you, Ashley.
You are so welcome. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved it. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you. This is great.
All right. See you guys this Thursday.